The night that changed everything in America. There are nights when the world seems to stand perfectly still. The soft hum of traffic outside, the gentle ticking of the wall clock, my tabby cat Milo curled up by my feet. That night in Lexington, Kentucky, was one of those. It was mid-October, with leaves swirling quietly across my porch and a mug of spiced tea warming my hands. The calm in my cozy living room felt earned. After a long day of debugging code, balancing budgets, and making sure my family was comfortable, I finally let myself breathe. I'm Olivia, 31 years old, and I had always believed that no matter how harsh the world got, family was my safe harbor. We'd had our squabbles, our awkward holiday dinners, but at the end of the day, my parents and older sister Julia were the ones I came home to. So when Mom texted that evening, "Let's catch up before bed," I settled into the corner of my couch, ready for our weekly ritual. On speaker, I greeted them all. Mom, Margaret, 61, Dad, Robert, 64, and Julia, 33, all living under my roof ever since I'd bought this house. The call went on just like always. They told me about a neighbor's new puppy. Dad boasted about a game of golf against his old buddy. Julia mumbled about looking for jobs, her voice thick with boredom. I nodded along, smiling at their stories, feeling the warm, familiar thread of connection tighten around me. There was nothing in those 20 minutes to warn me of what was waiting just around the corner. We said our good nights, Julia included. Night, live, and I let out a contented sigh, setting my phone on the coffee table. That's when I noticed it. The blue call indicator was still glowing. Curious, maybe a bit annoyed, I raised the phone and was about to hang up when their conversation filtered through, unedited, and so sharp it made my stomach twist. "Why are we stuck here, anyway?" Dad's voice. No hint of the jokey warmth I'd always known. "We're only here because Olivia lets us, and, let's be real, because of her paycheck. It isn't like we're mooching, not really, but still." A long pause, then my sister's harsh laugh, so unlike the half-hearted giggle she'd given me a few minutes earlier.
"Mark?"
"Dad, come on. We all know this is about her money. She thinks she's helping, but let's not pretend we'd be here if she couldn't pay the bills." I froze. Time felt thick, sticky. My hand gripping the phone so tight, my knuckles throbbed. Mom chimed in, tone clipped. "Just don't say anything. She's sensitive. We need her stable for a while longer." Hearing them cut into the fabric of my trust, dissecting my generosity like it was a business transaction, left me hollow. My heart hammered so loudly that, for a second, I wondered if they'd hear it through the call. I should have slammed the phone down, hung up, screamed. I felt everything and nothing. Confusion, betrayal, that icy prickle of realization settling in the back of my neck. These were my people, the family I chose to support, and behind my back, they were counting every dollar. The cat jumped onto my lap, startled by the silence, but I couldn't move. I heard Julia make some joke about how Olivia's charity is basically an ATM. You just gotta phrase it right. Dad and Mom both laughed. Even their laughter felt like a knife. It all poured into me, shattering every old memory, every cozy morning, every hard-won dinner conversation. I was no longer a daughter or a sister. I was the bank. I considered barging upstairs, confronting them then and there. But I just sat, numb, staring into the darkness as their voices faded out and the call finally disconnected. The living room, once my sanctuary, suddenly felt alien. I replayed the words over and over, unable to stop the looping film of betrayal. The taste of the tea went bitter in my mouth. The cat meowed for attention, but I barely noticed. All I wanted was to erase what I'd heard. Roll time backward. Cling to the illusion that family, at least, was unbreakable. But that illusion was gone. And with the night's quiet, an entirely new world settled over me, one that would never be the same. The artificial breakfast and the family masquerade. The following morning was a surreal performance. Every gesture layered in artificial normalcy, while my insides twisted with betrayal. I woke before sunrise, still haunted by the sting of last night's revelations, hands trembling as I started the day's most ordinary ritual, making breakfast for the family. The kitchen was cool and dim, the hum of the old coffee maker oddly loud. I set out ingredients automatically, the motions so familiar, they barely required thought. Cracking eggs, whisking batter, setting the bacon to sizzle in the pan. But every movement felt wrong, as if I'd stepped into someone else's life. My father was the first to shuffle in. Instead of his usual bear hug or friendly pat on the shoulder, he barely looked up from his phone. "Morning," he muttered, not meeting my gaze, eyelids heavy with avoidance, as he slouched into a seat and retreated behind the safety of the newspaper. His silence was jagged, unnatural. A day ago, I would have called it grumpiness. Now I saw it for what it was, guilt and calculation, lurking just below the surface. Mom was next, bustling in with a bright, brittle cheerfulness that grated against the hush I carried inside. "Emily, did you hear about the neighbor's new car? Isn't it something?" She chirped too loudly. Her hands fluttered, fussing with napkins, straightening silverware, avoiding the question marks in my eyes. Every syllable hinted at rehearsal. Each smile forced a little deeper than necessary, her laughter ringing too long for such a simple joke. Then came Megan, my older sister and partner on so many childhood adventures. She barely glanced up from her phone, thumbs dancing over the screen as if nothing else existed. A mumbled, "Hey," escaped her as she collapsed into a chair, her attention never lifting from whatever endless drama or distraction she was messaging about. She didn't touch the breakfast I'd laid out, didn't offer a thank you, just scrolled, detached from the gathering, detached from me. I set pancakes, toast, and steaming scrambled eggs on the table, my hands moving with a steadiness that belied the chaos inside. I listened more than I spoke, catching the fragments of their awkward conversations. Dad cleared his throat, flipping to the sports section, refusing to meet my eyes. Mom recounted trivial neighborhood gossip, her laughter a brittle shield against any real talk. Megan drifted through the conversation with a listlessness that, now, I saw in a new light. Not apathy, but entitlement. When I turned away to the sink, my heart thudded so loudly, it drowned out the hiss of the faucet. I washed dishes, drying each one carefully, as if the motions could fix everything broken between us. But even facing away, I felt their glances, Dad's restless fidgeting, Mom's eyes darting, Megan's indifferent slump. Every move exposed the chasm between appearance and reality. We were less a family and more a troupe of performers, reading old lines from a tired script, actors in a play where no one really remembered their characters' motivations. Sitting at that kitchen table, listening to forks scrape plates and weak jokes die in awkward silences, I realized how deeply the performance ran. And while I played my part, refilling coffee mugs, offering polite smiles, I started taking mental notes, determined to look deeper beneath the masks my family wore. The warmth in the kitchen was gone, replaced by a coldness that threatened to seep into every corner of my home. I was surrounded by people I thought I knew, but in truth, I was alone. A silent observer in a room full of familiar strangers. Looking back, good memories, and they're shattering. After that brutal night, I couldn't help but scan the landscape of my life, searching for cracks in every memory. The past began to flutter before my eyes, called up in vignettes, in small details I'd once thought precious. Now, with the sting of betrayal still fresh, I found myself revisiting the years leading up to this moment, asking, were things ever what they seemed? 3 years earlier, I had bought our house in Louisville. It was a hopeful, impulsive move. I'd inherited a modest sum from my grandfather, and, after years of feeling rootless, decided it was time for a true family home. The place needed work, creaking floorboards, a lawn gone wild, a kitchen straight out of the 80s, but it had space and sunlight and a future, or so I told myself, as I signed the last of the mortgage papers and handed over the first check. Mom and Dad claimed to be grateful, over and over again. There were hugs at the curb, laughter over tiny moving boxes, pizza on the living room floor that first night with only plastic plates. Jason, my older brother by 2 years, moved in a month later, his own dreams floundering, a series of dead-end jobs trailing behind him. They all said it was temporary, just until we get on our feet.
Hang in there.
I nodded, believing every word, happy to play provider, happy to have the noise and chaos of family again. There were good memories. Sunday mornings spent cooking together, pancakes and flower fights, long walks in Cherokee Park, lazy afternoons, watching old movies nobody really liked, but nobody dared turn off. Sometimes I'd come home late from work and find Mom waiting up, a cup of peppermint tea brewed, just in case. Dad built me a garden box in the backyard my first spring, even though he complained about his back. Jason would take my dog on runs, always making jokes, always loud and boisterous. But even as I relived these moments, shadows crept along their edges. The questions started small, fragments flickering in the corners of my mind. Why did Dad always want to talk about my bonuses at work? Why was Mom so insistent about choosing nice restaurants when we went out, places far above what we could afford when I was a kid? Why did Jason, grown man that he was, never seem concerned about keeping a job, even as the months drifted by? Then came the money talks, always couched as jokes or idle curiosity. "How's the market treating you?" Dad would ask over coffee, watching for my reaction. "Your job must pay really well," Mom would say, as she shopped for a new purse. Jason always needed help, just a little, until I get back on my feet. And I always gave it. It never felt sinister, not until now. Each conversation became a puzzle piece, each pattern of behavior, a thread that led somewhere I hadn't wanted to see. Looking back, there were signals I'd missed, moments where affection turned transactional, where gratitude had a little too much expectation lurking beneath it. Even holidays, once so sacred, began to feel like obligations. On my last birthday, Mom insisted on a big dinner out, an expensive French place. But when the check came, everyone looked to me. "You're the breadwinner now," she joked, and everyone laughed. Only now did I see the rigidity behind their laughter, the choreography of depending on me. I opened my notes app, writing down snippets of these memories. Dad avoids eye contact when he brings up money. Jason borrows cash, never pays back. Mom congratulates me on work, always after asking about salary. Even old photos seem to tell their own, sadder stories. Grins at the camera, shopping bags bulging at their feet. The realization was devastating. I had loved my family fiercely, had invested in us as the ultimate goal, but maybe I'd just become their ticket out of hard times. A steady paycheck, a guaranteed roof. The loyalty I'd prized was laced with dependency. The affection I'd relied on was tangled in financial need. Every happy memory
He knows where we hid
started
it.
to feel like an echo
We have to move
through a
it now.
cracked window, dulled by the knowledge of what came next. For days, I moved through my house in a fog, dusting picture frames, folding laundry, replaying memories like old cassettes, rewinding, looking for proof that the love I'd trusted was genuine. Maybe there had been love. Maybe there still was, somewhere deep below the hurt and the lies. But now, trust was gone, and the comfort of the past was a mirage shimmering at the edge of my new, painful reality. The financial traps become crystal clear. It's funny how, after a single night of revelation, you begin to see the details of everyday life with startling new clarity. Suddenly, the innocuous becomes incriminating, each innocent question and passing comment taking on the sharp edge of suspicion. I remember standing in my kitchen in Indianapolis that following week, sunlight slanting through the window, listening to the coffee pot gurgle, and wondering how long I had been blind to the truth. The changes started subtle, a shift in how I interpreted every conversation, every gesture. When my dad, Gregory, strolled into the kitchen on Tuesday, he asked, "You ever think about putting a bit more into that 401k? The market's been wild, huh?" His voice was casual, but his eyes lingered on my laptop, as if he expected me to open my banking app right then and there. He'd never shown so much interest before in what funds I chose or how much I contributed. It wasn't just fatherly concern anymore. It was probing. And when I gave only vague answers, he nodded with a stiff sort of acceptance, the way someone takes a rain check for something they'd really wanted right then. Later that day, my mom, Patricia, breezed in with her good mood, arms loaded with department store bags, cheeks pink from just a quick trip to the mall. I watched as she laid out her haul on the kitchen table, perfumes, a designer scarf, 3 pairs of shoes, and a set of espresso cups. "You work too hard, Alicia," she beamed. "We should treat ourselves. They had a flash sale, and these are such good quality." The cost tags made my wallet flinch. For years, I'd convinced myself that these sprees were infrequent, that Mom just needed a little joy now and then. But all week, the bags kept multiplying, and none of the credit card statements ever made it to my eyes. The worst culprit, by now, was Melissa, my sister, older by 2 years, but somehow always younger in the ways that counted. She'd spent the week alternating between the living room couch and her bedroom, her days filled with TikToks and Instagram posts about manifesting abundance and hustle culture. Ironic for someone currently working 0 hours per week. She wore new loungewear, her hair freshly colored, another expense I didn't recall approving. And every meal appeared magically prepared and set before her, courtesy of me, or the Grubhub account I funded. Questions began to multiply, anxious and sharp, each one peeling another layer from my carefully constructed version of home. Why were the utilities so high? Why did the family Netflix account have premium add-ons? Why, on Wednesday, did a package for a photography ring light arrive for Melissa when she'd been on a break from content creation for months? That night, while everyone else watched late-night reruns, I shut myself away in my office, stacks of open bills spread like crime scene evidence before me. My hands trembled as I scrubbed through each transaction. There were $450 dinners from restaurants I'd never set foot in, hundreds spent at beauty counters, and a monthly automated transfer labeled consulting, the exact amount Melissa had once asked to borrow for her now defunct fashion line. I found utility bills inflated well beyond reason, with suspicious one-time fees charted on every line. The mortgage payments had been rounded up. Strange, since the bank didn't require it. When I checked my savings, there were withdrawals I hadn't noticed before, all lining up with dates of Melissa's recent treat yourself posts. It was like a sick scavenger hunt. The more I hunted, the more rotten clues emerged. I'd believed I was the provider, the one holding the family together, but the numbers told another story. I was being drained, slowly, quietly, and persistently. Every little favor, every extra treat, had been a brick in the elaborate structure of their comfort, one that I funded without complaint. Now, the receipts were all I had, a painful, undeniable testimony to just how deep the financial manipulation ran. In the days that followed, I began to set traps of my own, little tests to see how boldly the pattern would persist. I left my checkbook out by accident, tucked beneath a pile of mail on the counter. The next morning, I found it inexplicably moved, with the last check written for double what Mom usually spent on groceries. I mentioned to Dad that I might take a pay cut at work just to see his reaction. His face paled, and he stammered something about hoping we could keep up with the mortgage. Melissa, oblivious, texted me that same day asking for just a bit more money for a final website tweak. Another dead project in her ever-expanding portfolio of personal failures. The house was haunted in a way. I saw ghosts of every dollar spent, every smile that cost me too much, every act of love that now felt transactional. I started to resent their dependency, my patience wearing thin as the bills stacked higher, and my gratitude for their presence evaporated. Each evening, while dinner conversations churned with bland routines, my mind raced with numbers, suspicions, and escape plans. On Friday, a call from my bank nearly sent my heart over the edge. "Hello, Miss Carter. We noticed some unusual activity on your secondary savings account. A wire transfer for $2,500 was made to a business registered to Melissa Carter. Did you authorize this?" The air drained from my lungs. Business account? I'd never agreed to anything of the sort. The puzzle pieces locked together. My trust had been weaponized, my generosity monetized. A rage mixed with sorrow washed through me. I didn't confront them, not yet. Instead, I started securing my assets, changing passwords, checking account statements daily. I opened a new account and moved most of my money, leaving only enough in the family fund for bare essentials. I told myself I would be smart now, not just kind. In the evenings, as we gathered in the living room, my family still played their roles. Melissa gushing over dream jobs, Mom prattling about her next shopping day, Dad appearing lost in baseball stats. But now, every line was loaded. I saw the signs of entitlement, the little betrayals, and financial leeches hiding behind "I love you." Before, I might have brushed aside this knowledge, swallowed my discomfort, and told myself family was worth any sacrifice. But the truth was undeniable. Kindness and trust had become open doors for exploitation. I kept my composure, quietly collecting proof, preparing for the day I'd lay the facts bare. If my family needed me only as a wallet, I would soon show them just how empty that could feel. My plan: uncovering the truth and protecting myself. After that week from hell, when every look, question, and stray receipt began to throb with suspicion, I realized something undeniable. I couldn't let things drift any longer. Couldn't keep playing the role they wrote for me. The silent giving daughter who footed every bill and never asked why. I needed a plan, not just a reaction, but a calculated, methodical plan to reclaim my agency in a house where it felt like love and loyalty had come with unwritten price tags. The first step was simple: document everything. I started by revisiting the spreadsheets I half kept for monthly expenses. But this time, I combed through them line by line, annotating every odd charge and mysterious transfer. I created a secret file on my laptop, naming it innocuously enough, just in case someone snooped, and started building a digital wall of evidence. My heart raced each time I highlighted a new expense I didn't remember approving. An Uber ride across town at midnight, a grocery store charge that didn't match what was in the refrigerator, a random consultant fee drafted directly out of my savings account. I listened carefully, taking mental notes when anyone in the house mentioned money. Dad would grumble about the mortgage, then ask if I'd gotten a year-end bonus at work. Mom would hint at appliance upgrades and slip designer finds into the house, bags tucked under her raincoat like contraband. Melissa always had some reason she needed just a little more, her tone breezy and entitled as she asked about next month's loan. But I made sure not to tip my hand. I played it cool, smiles at breakfast, polite conversation over dinner, even a few generous laughs when Dad cracked his old man golf jokes. If my family noticed my change, they probably chalked it up to stress at work. I was determined not to give them any warning that inquisitiveness was quietly replacing my ingrained trust. Next, I locked down my money. One Friday afternoon, I left work a little early, telling my manager I needed a mental health break. I drove straight to the bank. My stomach was in knots as I explained to the teller that I wanted to set up a new account, one with restricted access and advanced two-factor authentication on every platform. I split my deposits between the new private account and the household, checking that Mom and Dad once treated as their own. I reduced the monthly transfer, leaving just enough for real groceries and utilities, nothing that could bankroll shopping sprees or mystery projects. Every transaction from that day forward had to be explained by a matching receipt, and all my important paperwork got moved into a locked drawer just out of sight. Once I had a safe financial perimeter around myself, I went about confirming my theories. Every time Melissa asked for a cash infusion, I told her gently I was short this week. I watched her reaction. She rolled her eyes, shot me a look of pure disbelief, and stormed off to her room. 30 minutes later, I got a notification that someone tried to access my old Venmo account. Two-factor blocked her, but the evidence was there. My little sister thought nothing of digging when she thought I'd finally said no. The same pattern repeated over and over. That week, I started to say no to dinners out, insisted on splitting grocery runs, and kept my phone and laptop in my bag unless I was in the room. Their attitudes shifted. Mom bristled, Dad became withdrawn, and Melissa got defensive and snappish. To anyone else, it might have looked like normal family tension, but I saw the connections. Every barrier I raised between me and my accounts chipped away at the illusion of familial harmony. But it wasn't just about money anymore. I needed to know if the emotional support I gave was ever unconditional from them, or if every hug had always masked an ask. So, I quietly set an emotional trap. I stopped volunteering to solve their little daily problems. When Dad got a flat, I let him call roadside assistance instead of paying for a tow. When Mom panicked over her failing stand mixer, I just suggested she check the warranty. No replacement from me. When Melissa lamented her latest broken phone screen, I wished her luck getting a quote for repairs. The result? The air in the house grew increasingly tense. No one said anything outright, but the looks were enough. The warm thank yous dropped away, replaced by terse politeness. I journaled every small silence, every side-eye. There was no affection without monetary exchange, and that realization broke my heart just a little more each day. That's when I realized I'd need legal help if I wanted to protect the inheritance Granddad left specifically for me. One particularly raw Tuesday night, I sat cross-legged on my bed and scheduled a consultation with a lawyer. She was calm, professional, and, best of all, non-judgmental. She walked me through setting up stricter safeguards on my accounts, filing the necessary paperwork to restrict shared assets, and drawing up basic legal documents that made it harder for anyone but me to claim stakes in my property or income moving forward. Stepping out of the office into the near-freezing dusk, I felt something like relief. I wasn't running away from my family, but I was done making myself easy prey for their manipulations. My plan was working, not because it gave me power over them, but because it finally returned power to me, the person whose hands had been feeding everyone else for years. Still, I didn't confront them. Not yet. I knew that moment would come, and it would be ugly, but I didn't want it to be a messy, desperate fight. I wanted facts on my side. Every "you're making it up" met with bank statements, receipts, and backup logs. My nightmare would end cleanly. No drama, no threats, just the truth. I would lay it out, claim my future, and lock the doors. I was taking my life back, one cold-blooded, quietly determined step at a time. And with every precaution, every small act of defiance, I felt myself healing. And finally, free. The night of confrontation. Truth shatters every lie. Sunday night arrived on soft, uncertain feet, slipping quietly into the fabric of my life that still felt brittle from weeks of revelations and heartache. The house was shrouded in an unnatural hush, a heavy, anticipatory quiet that stretched across the walls and seeped into every corner. I stood at the threshold of the dining room, with my hands trembling, and my mind rehearsing every word, every question, every shred of evidence I'd gathered. I'd spent days tightening the net, safeguarding my finances, collecting proof, and steeling my resolve. Tonight would be different. Tonight, I would no longer play the role of the family's silent provider. Tonight, I'd demand honesty, or nothing at all. I called everyone to dinner, my voice calm yet steely, echoing a resolve I had not known I possessed. In the dining room, the table was set, candles flickering, the meal arranged with meticulous care, a tableau that belied the storm about to break. Dad showed up first, his steps weighted and eyes shadowed with something like dread. Mom came next, her smile brittle, searching my face for hints of the agenda. Melissa lingered in the hallway, texting vigorously, until I called her name a second time. The small, nervous rituals unfolded, napkins adjusted, glasses filled, polite murmurs exchanged. But nothing could mend the invisible fractures that stretched between us. Once everyone was seated, forks poised, I looked at each of them in turn. For one excruciating moment, I saw my family not as loved ones, but as actors waiting for their cues. My heart ached, but my mind was clear. I set my phone on the table, screen down, as if even that small gesture cut off their last lifeline to manipulation. "I want to talk," I started, my voice steady, piercing the unnatural silence. "No one leaves this table until we're finished, and I am not willing to carry on unless everyone is honest. Absolutely honest." Dad stiffened, glancing at Mom, who instinctively looked down at her plate. Melissa just huffed, rolling her eyes in a performance so obvious it might have been rehearsed. For a few seconds, I let the silence do its work, letting discomfort take root. Then, in a measured voice, I told them everything. I recounted what I had overheard that fateful night on the phone, their voices cutting through the pretense of loving concern to expose their real feelings. That I was little more than a lifeline, a walking ATM, a paycheck stapled to a hollow roll. I told them about the receipts, the Venmo attempts, the mysterious wire transfers, the groceries and credit card charges that didn't match what we needed. I even mentioned the small betrayals, the checkbook found moved out of place, the half-lies about needing money for emergencies that turned out to be new shoes or Instagram-perfect brunches. The room was so silent, I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. Dad finally spoke, voice cracked and defensiveness etched in every syllable. "We never meant to hurt you," he said, hands trembling slightly. "It just got out of hand. We fell on tough times. You know that. It wasn't about you." Mom began to quietly sob, her tears falling onto her plate as she whispered apologies, some genuine, some sounding more like habits of self-preservation. Melissa, for her part, barely veiled her resentment. "So are you going to throw us out?" she snapped, face twisted between anger and something that looked suspiciously like fear. I shook my head, surprised by the surge of clarity and strength I felt. "I'm not here to play judge or victim. I'm just done being taken for granted. You knew exactly what you were doing. You let it happen, and it ends now." I laid out the terms. They were to gather their belongings, and by tomorrow evening, the house would be mine again. Just mine. I told them I had already spoken to a lawyer and filed the papers necessary to protect my assets, and that any further misdirection or attempts to siphon off money would be met with legal action. I shared how their behavior had impacted my trust, my mental health, my belief in unconditional family love. Their reactions were a study in contrasts. Dad masked his defeat with anger, muttering about cold-heartedness, as though the years of invisible labor I had shouldered meant nothing. Mom wept in earnest now, trying to appeal to memories, to the good times, but her words fell lifeless between us. Melissa stormed upstairs, slamming doors, spouting accusations about betrayal and family loyalty, concepts she had conveniently weaponized when it suited her, forgotten otherwise. The rest of the night blurred with box packing, short tempers, and long, bitter silences. My father avoided my eyes as he carried out suitcases. My mother stopped in the kitchen, leaving a note scrawled in shaky handwriting, a jumble of apology and nostalgia I wasn't ready to read. Melissa, last to leave, spat out a final insult, determined to wear her anger like armor. I locked the door behind them. My body shook, my heart threatening to break open. But beneath the pain, a strange lightness stirred. This was the hardest thing I had ever done. And somehow, I knew it was the only way forward. I sat on the bottom stair, the house suddenly cavernous and still. Shadows drifted across the living room walls, sharp-edged and unfamiliar in this new chapter. But I didn't cry. Not yet. I let the silence fill me. For the first time in years, I was alone in my own home. The air vibrated with raw possibility. All the lies and manipulations, all the little deaths I'd suffered, had led me here. Tonight wasn't just about confrontation. It was about liberation, about finally rewriting the script of who I wanted to be. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the steady, insistent beat beneath my skin, a reminder that I was still here, still whole, and, at last, mine. Rebirth in freedom and lessons that linger. The morning after that night of truth, my house was quieter than it had ever been. There was a rawness to the silence, as if the very walls were holding their breath, uncertain of what came next. The emptiness that followed my family's departure was not just physical. It carved deep lines through my routines, reshaped the very fabric of my daily existence. And yet, As I stood alone in the kitchen, no more frantic calls for help, no need for performative breakfasts, I felt a subtle, insistent bloom of something unfamiliar. Freedom. It didn't happen overnight. At first, there was only numbness and fatigue. My body moved on autopilot, but my mind was alive with racing thoughts and half-formed questions. Was I heartless? Did I give up too soon? Could I have saved the connection that once meant everything to me? The echo of my family's voices, their pleas, justifications, apologies, and even their silence after the confrontation haunted me in the first days of solitude. I replayed every conversation, every slight, every request for yet another loan or favor. But as the days folded into weeks, grief and guilt gave way to gradual clarity. Mornings became sacred. Time, just for me. I found new rituals. Running at sunrise through city parks, drinking my coffee slowly, while light streamed through wide living room windows, journaling to untangle knots of anger and sorrow. My tabby cat, Milo, became my companion in quiet reflection, curling up beside me during evenings spent curled with books I'd never had time for before. With my family gone, my finances stabilized quickly. I finally saw, with complete transparency, the impact of their subtle siphoning. The mounting bills, the unexplained withdrawals, the emergencies that were little more than habits of entitlement. The relief was immense, almost dizzying. I no longer lived with the tension of wondering what would disappear from my account next, or whether my kindness would be misconstrued as obligation. I set budgets, paid debts, and started saving not just out of necessity, but because it felt good, because it was mine. Bit by bit, I rebuilt a circle of trust, this time choosing carefully. My best friend Sarah, who had watched me unravel and come back together, became a constant. She reminded me what genuine care sounded like. Simple phone calls to ask how my day was. Spontaneous movie nights. Laughter that wasn't tinged with expectation. Through her, and through therapy, I realized that my definition of family could be wholly my own. Boundaries were not a betrayal, but an act of fierce self-respect. Of course, the world didn't stop spinning because I'd drawn new lines. My parents tried to reach out, emails that alternated between apology and blame, messages that pinged my phone in the quiet hours, voicemails I would sometimes listen to, sometimes just delete. My sister, humiliated and livid, cut all contact. Old friends sent cautious texts, not sure whose side to take. I let most of it pass by, answering only when I felt strong enough, never allowing anyone to erode the boundaries I'd built from so much pain. The house itself became a project in healing. I cleared out rooms filled with memories, boxes of photos, shoes by the door, abandoned hobbies that smelled of someone else's ambition. I painted the walls, soft whites and spring greens, replaced heavy curtains with linen that let in morning light. Every change was a declaration, a reminder that I could shape my environment, as I learned at last to shape my relationships too. 6 months later, I stood at the threshold one last time, keys jingling in my palm. I had decided to sell the house, a choice that stunned even me at first. But letting go of that place, with its layers of comfort and heartbreak, was the final step in reclaiming my life. The day I closed, I moved into a sunlit apartment right in the middle of Columbus, close to galleries, a favorite coffee shop, and Sarah's quirky flat. My world both shrank and expanded, no longer dictated by old obligations, but alive with new possibility. Freedom wasn't the easy fix I'd fantasized about at my lowest. There were still hard nights, dreams where I opened the door and found them waiting on the porch, smiling as if nothing had ever broken between us. I'd wake with a knot in my chest, the old questions gnawing at the edges of my heart. But the lessons, those I welcomed. I carried them with me every day. I learned that love is not synonymous with sacrifice, and that the impulse to give must be met with respect and reciprocity. That it's okay to walk away from people who use your loyalty as their security blanket. That the capacity to forgive doesn't always mean reconciliation. It sometimes just means refusing to let bitterness claim another square inch of your life. I learned how to say no, how to say yes only when it felt true, and above all, how to silence the inner voice that said my worth was measured by what I could do for others. Most importantly, I realized that happiness was not about achieving some tidy fairy tale resolution, but about living honestly, with eyes wide open. I might have lost the family I thought I knew, but I did not lose myself. Instead, I found a version of me that was resilient, resourceful, and finally, fiercely free. Sometimes in the evenings, I stand by my window and look out at the city lights. Milo pressed warm against my side. I think about what it took to get here, about the cost of truth, and I know that I paid it gladly for the sake of the life I have now. My story isn't tragic or triumphant, or even particularly dramatic in the grand scheme of things. It's just true, and that truth is all the freedom I'll ever need.